What if the real reason you suffer is not people, not situations, not betrayal, but your reaction to them? Why do a single sentence from someone change your mood? Why does someone's opinion control your confidence? Why does silence from others create anxiety inside you? Tonight, we solve one brutal truth. Back and index pointing right, you are not controlled by the world. You are controlled by your emotional attachment to it. And once you master this, nothing and nobody will affect you again. Listen carefully, because this is where most people lose their entire life without even realizing it. Emotional reaction is not just a feeling. It is a transfer of control. The moment you react emotionally, you are no longer the observer of your life. You become the participant in someone else's game. And this is exactly how power has always worked in human behavior. As Niccolò Machiavelli understood centuries ago, men are not ruled by truth. They are ruled by emotion, perception, and response. Now understand this deeply. No one can control a calm mind. No one can manipulate a silent observer. No one can dominate a person who refuses to react. Control begins the moment your emotional state becomes dependent on external triggers. Think about your daily life. Someone says something slightly disrespectful and instantly your mood shifts. Someone ignores your message and suddenly your thoughts become unstable. Someone disagrees with you and you feel an urge to defend yourself, to explain yourself, to prove yourself. But ask yourself something honest: who changed your emotional state? Was it them, or was it your reaction to them? Because the truth is uncomfortable. Nothing outside of you has direct access to your mind. No word, no action, no behavior can enter your emotional system unless you allow it through reaction. And yet, most people leave completely exposed. They walk through life like open doors. Every opinion enters, every insult echoes, every silence becomes a threat, every rejection becomes a wound. This is not strength. This is emotional accessibility, and emotional accessibility is the first form of control. Because once someone knows they can change your mood, they can guide your behavior without ever touching you. They do not need to command you. They do not need to force you. They only need to observe what affects you. If praise lifts you up, they give you praise. If silence disturbs you, they give you silence. If criticism breaks you, they give you criticism. And without realizing it, you begin to dance according to triggers that are not even yours. This is the hidden system of human interaction. Not everyone is consciously manipulating you, but life itself rewards those who understand emotional predictability. Now here is the deeper layer. Your emotional reaction is not just visible to others. It is recorded inside your own mind. Every time you react strongly, you are teaching your brain that external events are important enough to override your inner state. So slowly, your stability disappears. You stop being stable internally and start becoming reactive externally. This is why most people are never in control of themselves. They are controlled by interruption. Every message, every opinion, every glance, every silence becomes a switch that flips their inner state. But power begins where reaction ends. Imagine a different version of you, one who hears everything but absorbs nothing immediately. One who sees everything but responds only after thought. One whose emotional state does not rise and fall with external behavior. That person becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is a form of psychological protection. Because the moment you are predictable, you are usable. You can be pressed, pushed, provoked, and pulled into emotional reactions that reveal your internal structure. But when you stop reacting instantly, when you create distance between stimulus and response, something powerful happens. You reclaim the space where manipulation used to live, because manipulation does not work on logic. It works on reaction time, it works on emotional speed, it works on that split second where your feelings speak before your mind does. And most people never interrupt that process. They feel first, they react second, they regret later. This cycle repeats until life itself feels like something happening to them instead of something being observed by them. But understand, this deeply emotional reaction is not just a weakness, it is permission for others to enter your mental space. Permission for situations to define your mood, permission for words to shape your identity, and once you give that permission repeatedly, people stop seeing your true self. They only see your reactions. And if all someone knows about you is how you react, they don't know you at all. They only know how to influence you. This is the beginning of invisible control, because a reactive mind is always responding, always adjusting, always compensating. It never stands still long enough to recognize its own power. And this is why true strength has never been about speaking louder, reacting faster, or defending harder. True strength begins when nothing outside you is allowed to rewrite what is inside you in real time. When words pass through you without changing you, when actions are observed without emotional distortion. When silence is tolerated without internal collapse, at that point, something fundamental shifts in your psychology. You are no longer available for manipulation. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forces in human behavior. Most people think silence means weakness. They think silence means confusion, fear, or lack of response. But in reality, silence is none of these things. Silence is control without noise. Silence is awareness without exposure. Silence is power that does not announce itself, and this is where most people lose their advantage in life. They speak too quickly, they explain too much, they react too fast. They believe that response equals strength. But the truth is completely opposite. Strength is not in how fast you respond. Strength is in whether you respond at all. In the world described by Niccolò Machiavelli, human beings reveal their intentions through pressure. When pressure is applied, the weak react immediately, the controlled observe, the powerful stay silent long enough to understand the situation before revealing anything about themselves. Because silence does something words cannot do. Silence removes information. When you speak, you expose your thinking. When you react, you expose your emotion. When you defend yourself instantly, you expose your insecurity. But when you stay silent, you reveal nothing, and in human psychology, nothing cannot be controlled. People cannot manipulate what they cannot decode, and silence makes you unreadable. Now understand this carefully. Every time someone provokes you, they are not just trying to insult you. They are testing you. They are looking for patterns. They are observing whether you react emotionally, whether you defend quickly, whether you lose internal stability when pressure is applied. Because once your reaction pattern is known, you are predictable. And once you are predictable, you are controllable. But silence breaks prediction. Silence interrupts expectation. When someone expects anger and receives nothing, their strategy collapses. When someone expects explanation and receives silence, their confidence weakens. When someone expects emotional reaction and receives calm stillness, they begin to question their own approach. This is where silence becomes psychological dominance, not because you are doing something aggressive, but because you are doing nothing that can be used against you. Silence forces the other person to sit with their own behavior. It turns their projection back onto them. It removes the emotional fuel they were expecting to use, and in that moment the balance shifts, because most conflicts are not about truth. They are about emotional control. The one who reacts more loses control of perception. The one who stays silent controls the frame of interpretation. People underestimate silence because they associate power with expression. They believe power must be visible, loud, or assertive. But real psychological power often hides behind stillness. Silence creates uncertainty in others, and uncertainty creates discomfort. When people cannot read your emotional state, they begin to overthink. They begin to fill the gaps with their own assumptions. And those assumptions often work against them. This is where silence becomes a mirror. It reflects others back to themselves. A person expecting conflict begins to feel their own aggression. A person expecting weakness begins to question their judgment. A person expecting reaction begins to lose direction when no reaction arrives, and slowly control shifts away from them without a single word being spoken. But silence is not just external, it is internal discipline, because the hardest silence is not the silence of words, it is the silence of emotion. To not respond when provoked, to not defend when misunderstood, to not explain when unnecessary, to not chase validation when ignored. This kind of silence requires mastery over impulse. Most people cannot stay silent because silence feels like loss. They feel like they are losing the argument, losing respect, losing presence. But what they don't realize is that in trying to win externally, they are losing internally. Every unnecessary explanation weakens your position. Every emotional reaction exposes your control points. Every rushed response gives others access to your mental structure. Silence closes those access points. Silence creates distance between stimulus and response, and in that distance lies freedom, freedom from manipulation, freedom from emotional hijacking, freedom from being pulled into conversations that are designed to drain you rather than understand you. And over time, silence changes how others treat you, not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped offering emotional reactions as currency. People cannot feed off what you no longer provide. No anger to trigger, no fear to exploit, no justification to challenge, no emotional loop to continue, just stillness. And in that stillness, your presence begins to speak louder than words ever could. There is a point in human evolution where survival is no longer physical. It becomes psychological. And in that space, the strongest person is not the one who reacts the most, nor the one who speaks the loudest, but the one who needs the least. Because need is the beginning of control, the moment you need something from the outside world, approval, validation, attention, agreement, you create a dependency. And dependency is always visible to others, even when you try to hide it. This is where detachment becomes power. Not emotional emptiness, not coldness, but the ability to exist without being owned by outcomes. Niccolò Machiavelli understood a fundamental truth about human nature. People value what is difficult to influence, and they attempt to control what is easily moved. So when your emotional state depends on how others treat you, you become movable, you become adjustable. You become predictable in your responses, because everything outside you starts shaping everything inside you. But detachment breaks that chain. Detachment means you can observe without absorbing. It means you can experience without being consumed. It means you can engage without surrendering your inner stability. Most people confuse attachment with connection. They believe that to care means to depend. But in reality, dependence is not connection. It is vulnerability disguised as emotion. Think about it. When someone ignores you and your mood collapses, that is not because of them. It is because your emotional stability was tied to their behavior. When someone praises you and you feel elevated, that is not confidence. That is external validation controlling internal identity. And this is how most minds operate without awareness. They rise and fall based on external reactions, never realizing they are not in control of their emotional center. But detachment changes the entire structure. When you are detached, praise becomes information, not identity. Criticism becomes feedback, not damage. Silence becomes neutral, not threatening. Presence and absence no longer dictate your emotional state. And at that moment, something shifts in your psychology. You stop negotiating your worth, because people can only influence you through what you value. If you value approval, they can control you with approval. If you value attention, they can withdraw attention. If you value emotional response, they can trigger emotional response. But when you detach from these needs, the tools of influence lose their effectiveness. Detachment is not about rejecting people. It is about removing the internal hook that allows others to pull you. And once that hook is gone, interactions change completely. You begin to see people more clearly. You stop overinterpreting silence. You stop overinvesting in words. You stop building emotional narratives around temporary behavior. You start observing patterns instead of reacting to moments. And this is where psychological power begins. Because the detached mind is not easily manipulated, it does not rush into conclusions. It does not chase emotional highs or avoid emotional lows. It remains centered even when external conditions shift. This creates something extremely rare in human interaction, stability that cannot be disrupted. And stability is intimidating to those who rely on emotional influence, because they cannot predict how you will respond. They cannot push you into extremes. They cannot extract emotional reactions that reveal your inner state. In the absence of reaction, influence collapses. People begin to realize they are no longer shaping your emotions. And when that realization hits, their behavior changes. Some will respect it. Some will test it. Some will retreat from it. But none of them can control it, because detachment removes leverage, and leverage is everything in human interaction. If someone can make you anxious, they have leverage. If someone can make you chase, they have leverage. If someone can make you explain yourself repeatedly, they have leverage. But if none of these actions affect your internal state, the leverage disappears completely. Detachment is not distance from life. It is distance from control points. It is the ability to participate in life without being emotionally consumed by it. And when you reach this state, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop being a reaction and start becoming an observer. And observers are always harder to manipulate than participants. There is a truth about human beings that most people never fully accept, even after experiencing it again and again. People do not respond to reality, They respond to their perception of reality. What actually happens is often less important than how it is interpreted. And how it is interpreted depends entirely on emotion, assumption, and internal bias. This is the foundation of influence, conflict, misunderstanding, and even control. Niccolò Machiavelli recognized this long before modern psychology ever explained it. Power is not held by those who are right, but by those who shape perception effectively. Because reality is stable, but perception is flexible. Reality does not change easily, but perception can be shifted instantly. And that is where human vulnerability begins. When someone forms an opinion about you, they are not seeing you. They are seeing a filtered version of you based on their emotions, expectations, and past experiences. And once that perception is formed, it begins to act like truth inside their mind, even if reality contradicts it. This is why misunderstandings can grow so quickly. One moment, one sentence, one reaction, and suddenly an entire narrative is built in someone's mind, not based on what you are, but based on what they believe you are. And once that narrative is in place, it becomes extremely resistant to correction. Because people do not like to abandon their interpretations. It feels like admitting they were wrong. So instead of adjusting perception, they defend it. This is where psychological distance begins. You may be calm, but you are perceived as arrogant. You may be silent, but you are perceived as weak. You may be careful, but you are perceived as suspicious. You may be honest, but you are perceived as manipulative, not because of what you are doing, but because of how others are interpreting it. And this is where most people lose control of their emotional state. They start reacting to perceptions instead of reality. They try to correct misunderstandings instantly. They try to defend themselves against interpretations. They try to force clarity where confusion already exists, but in doing so, they enter the other person's perception field. And once you enter someone else's perception field emotionally, you are no longer controlling the interaction, you are reacting inside it. This is why over-explaining rarely works, because explanation does not always change perception. Sometimes it strengthens it. The more you try to defend yourself, the more importance you give to the accusation. And in human psychology, importance often reinforces belief. So perception becomes stronger, not weaker, and this is where emotional discipline becomes essential. Instead of rushing to correct every misunderstanding, the controlled mind observes first. It understands that perception is not always immediate to change. It is shaped over time through consistency, not reaction, because people eventually align perception with repeated patterns, not isolated explanations. If your behavior remains stable, perception slowly adjusts. If your reactions are inconsistent, perception becomes unstable but fixed in emotional memory. And emotional memory is far more powerful than logic. This is why a single emotional moment can define someone's image in another person's mind more than years of neutral behavior. Because emotional intensity leaves stronger impressions than factual accuracy, and once that impression is formed, it begins to filter everything else. Every action you take is now interpreted through that lens. Every silence becomes confirmation. Every word becomes evidence. Every gesture becomes meaning. This is the invisible system of human judgment, but there is another layer. Perception does not only affect how others see you, it affects how you see yourself. If people repeatedly respond to you as if you are weak, you may begin to question your strength. If people repeatedly treat you as if you are unimportant, you may begin to question your value. If people consistently misunderstand you, you may begin to doubt your clarity. And slowly, external perception starts shaping internal identity. This is where most people lose themselves without realizing it, because they begin adjusting their behavior not based on truth, but based on how they are perceived. But power returns the moment you separate reality from perception, when you understand that perception is not absolute truth, but emotional interpretation. You stop trying to control it instantly. You stop chasing universal approval. You stop reacting to every misunderstanding as if it defines you. Instead, you become consistent, and consistency reshapes perception over time without confrontation. Because, in the long run, reality does influence perception, but only when you stop trying to force it in the short term. And this is the final realization. You cannot control how people interpret you in every moment, but you can control what remains stable enough that perception eventually has no choice but to adjust itself. The final state of control at the end of all understanding, after all observation, after all experience with people, conflict, silence, reaction, and misunderstanding, one truth remains unchanged. Human life is not controlled by events. It is controlled by interpretation of events, and interpretation is always shaped by emotion. This is why most people never realize where their suffering truly comes from. They believe it is the words of others, the behavior of others, the absence, the rejection, the betrayal. But in reality, all of these are only external triggers. The real battle has always been internal. Because the moment you react emotionally, you give the external world access to your internal state. You allow situations to define your mood. You allow people to shape your identity. You allow perception to override reality. And once this pattern continues long enough, you stop living as yourself and start living as a reflection of everything around you. But the opposite state exists, a state where nothing enters you without permission, a state where silence is not discomfort but control, a state where detachment is not emptiness but strength, a state where perception does not shake identity and reaction does not define character. This is the final lesson hidden in the philosophy of Niccolò Machiavelli, that power is never given to the loudest voice, the fastest reaction, or the most emotional mind. Power belongs to the one who understands human behavior without being consumed by it. When you reach this state, you no longer chase validation because you are no longer dependent on it. You no longer fear silence because silence no longer means loss. You no longer rush to defend yourself because you are no longer living inside every perception created about you. Instead, you observe everything without being controlled by anything, and slowly something changes at the deepest level of awareness. People can still speak, situations can still unfold, misunderstandings can still exist, but none of them penetrate your center the way they once did. Because control is no longer outside you, it is inside the space between stimulus and response, the space you finally learned to own. And in that space, nothing and nobody has the power to affect you again.